South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South East Radio.
Good morning, I'm Karl Fitzpatrick and welcome to Business Matters. Well, tourism and hospitality businesses across the country have incurred substantial costs to enable them to reopen for business following the lockdown. As a result of this, Fáilte Ireland's COVID-19 Adaptation Fund provides tourism-related businesses with an opportunity to recoup some of these costs. And Mary Stack, the Head of Product Development with the tourism body, joins me now to discuss this in more detail. Mary, we'll be discussing Fáilte Ireland's COVID-19 Adaptation Fund. But as we talk in the middle of September, how is the Irish tourism sector faring at present?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's been probably one of the toughest seasons, I think, Karl, that has ever faced the tourism sector. International tourism, we have no international visitors, and many businesses, particularly in Dublin, would be wholly dependent on, the international visitors. So their businesses in Dublin, I think, will be struggling very, very significantly. Outside of Dublin, it's a story of two halves as well. We have, reports back of some businesses being up this year, particularly those along the Wild Atlantic Way and certain parts of the Wild Atlantic Way, and then others that have struggled as well in those parts of the country. So it's a mixed bag, but in general, I don't think any tourism business would tell you that they had a particularly good season this year.
Apart from the lack of business, what are your tourism businesses identifying as their biggest challenges as they face into quieter winter months?
It's their costs, Karl. So it's, many of these businesses have sunken costs that are just, even if you hibernate, they still have to pay. So things like rents and utilities and wage bills, all those kind of things, they don't go anywhere. You still have to try and pay those bills. And there has been a significant government response, I would say, to this. And there are some great supports out there. So things like, there are the Restart Fund put out by the government, which does cover, utilities and rent and all those kind of things. And obviously the employee wage subsidy scheme. So those kind of programs are vital to businesses, because what we're hearing now is obviously when there's no demand, many businesses will close and hibernate, but they still have to cover those costs.
And a key initiative contained within the government's July stimulus was the Stay and Spend scheme. What has been the reaction from the industry in relation to this initiative?
Yeah, really positive. I think any initiative that will help drive demand. And this is demand obviously within Ireland, because as I mentioned, international tourism is pretty much doesn't exist in Ireland at the moment. So anything that supports that, I think, is a welcome initiative. So businesses are signing up to that, and obviously when it launches, we're asking the consumers to sign up to that as well. So it's a welcomed initiative on the demand side, I suppose, which is always helpful as well.
And Mary, what supports has Fáilte Ireland been providing to businesses over the past 6 months?
Well, Karl, we've been working with businesses really since the get-go, since COVID hit. And that was to put in place lots of business support measures. And they were things like, helping businesses on their liquidity side, just on working capital, on, human resources side of things, just to get them, businesses, I suppose, when this struck, were in shock and didn't know, they had to close down quickly and didn't know then what the implications of that were. So it was just working with them on the business support side primarily to begin with. So we set up a dedicated business support hub. And we worked with hundreds and thousands of businesses around the country just to help them to manage their costs and revenue streams, that kind of stuff. And that's gone very, very well. And then more recently, I suppose, as we've seen the government roadmap evolve and restrictions, if you like, ease, we've worked with businesses on reopening. And we've taken a number of steps in relation to reopening. So to launch things like the COVID Safety Charter, which you may be familiar with. It's an initiative that Fáilte Ireland came up with, which basically allows a business to demonstrate that they have implemented health and safety measures that are appropriate and mean that you as a visitor are safe to visit. We've also implemented a lot of the NEFIT and government recommendations in the form of guidelines. We've developed guidelines for a number of sectors, interpreting those measures and protocols, and they've been rolled out for a number of sectors. And then the final strand, I suppose, to that kind of reopening, if you like, initiative is the whole adaptation fund that we launched back in July, which is a funding to cover some of the costs for the reopening of those tourism and hospitality businesses.
The reason I've asked you to join us on this morning's show is specifically to discuss the COVID-19 Fáilte Ireland Adaptation Fund. What is it and who's eligible to apply for it?
Yeah, thanks, Karl. That's great, because we are we do want to keep getting the word out there. The fund is still open and we are still looking for applications. So the fund itself, Minister Martin, as you mentioned, secured it as part of the July stimulus package. So we want to thank the Minister for that. It's 26 million euros in funding for basically to support tourism and hospitality businesses in the costs that they incurred to adapt their premises to reopen. So what I mean by that is people who've been around the country on their holidays will have seen protective screens and barriers, in attractions and accommodation. They'll have seen maybe new outdoor areas popping up, so seating and furniture and awning. They'll have seen, and what some things they may not be able to see is that people have even put in online booking systems, so new technology, all that kind of stuff. Anything that helps you to avoid queues and to implement social distancing, all the costs that businesses have incurred in that regard, we want to contribute to give some money back towards that, because these are businesses that to begin with did not have the money to spend, but were really, really keen and anxious to make sure that their visitors are safe and that all of the reopening guidelines that I just mentioned there were implemented correctly.
Now, the tourism sector is a very wide sector in that respect. So what specific businesses are eligible to apply for this fund?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are probably 12,000 businesses that would be eligible under this fund, and we want them all to apply. And they range from attractions. So, and again, attractions, are not all one size. There are many, many different types and sizes of attractions. Activity providers are also eligible. We also have accommodation providers, and that's all accommodation providers, again, from the likes of B&Bs, self-catering, hotels, hostels, guest houses. And we also have bars and restaurants being eligible as well.
So talk to us about the limits in terms of funding and grant aid available under the particular scheme and an outline of the different strands that apply.
Yeah, so there are actually two strands to the fund, and strand A is really for those businesses that have premises. So the likes of accommodation providers, attractions, where they would have had to adapt those premises to enable their visitors to come and visit. So that's what Strand A is for, and the maximum amount of Strand A is up to 15,000. It ranges from 500 to 15,000. And then Strand B is for, we didn't want to leave out, a lot of tourism businesses don't have premises, so the likes of an activity provider, surfing providers and boat operators, those kind of guys still offer a really brilliant experience, but maybe have equipment. Not a premises, might have equipment, so they have to be cleaned. And Strand B then contributes funding towards, I guess, the consumables, if you like, the PPE and the sanitisation equipment that you need to clean that equipment, again, to make sure that these experiences are safe for visitors.
So, Mary, the fund itself is open for applications until the 8th of October. So what is involved in the application process?
So we've made it quite simple because we know businesses have incurred these costs, Karl. So really it comes down to you should go on to the Filte Ireland website, www.filteireland.ie. And on that website, you can check if you're eligible. There's a pre-eligibility check. And if you will find out, you answer a few questions that you are eligible, you then are given all the details to go forward to apply. On the other hand, you may be a business that works with us already, and you may have a trade portal account. So you should log into your trade portal account, and under funding, you will have been assigned the form if you're eligible. So we've made it quite easy for businesses to do that. We're not looking for you to submit invoices and receipts. What we're looking for, from a proof perspective, is that you can show us photographs and evidence that you have implemented the works, and we'll look at those and say, look, that looks appropriate. It's a self-assessment scheme, and there will be spot checks and audits later on, but we're relying on you as part of your application to only apply for the costs that you've incurred. So if I'm telling you, Karl, you're eligible as a hotel, we'll say, for 15,000, and you've only spent 10, then you should only be applying for 10, obviously. That's the cost you incurred. And that's what the application is there for. So it's a very, very quick application. But I will say there are a few criteria that you have to meet in order to be eligible, and that means you have to be open. So we know pubs are opening next week, and they'll be eligible to apply from next week, and I would encourage them all to apply from next week. You have to have the safety charter that I mentioned earlier. So again, if you want to apply, you should go on immediately onto Filte Ireland's website and apply for the safety charter. And you have to have implemented the reopening guidelines.
And once a business does apply, how long does it take to process the application and actually receive the grant?
Well, it really does come down to the business putting in a full application, having the safety charter, having all of that. And of course, when we first opened, Karl, we were inundated with applications, obviously. So we're turning them around now very quickly. It's only a couple of weeks. It's only a matter of weeks before you get the funding. It's not months or anything like that. It's getting a lot quicker. What I really, really would suggest is that you go through all the steps and you put in as good an application as you possibly can. Update, when you're uploading photographs of the works you've done, make sure that it's quite clear what you have done, because otherwise we'll have to come back to you and we'll have to try and ask a number of questions, and it's quicker and you get your money quicker, the better the application, I suppose, really. So, but normally it just takes a couple of weeks. It's not very long at all.
What else is Fáilte Ireland working on currently to be able to assist the ongoing challenges that tourism-related businesses are having during this difficult period?
Interestingly, I suppose, Karl, we've just also launched a scheme for B&Bs. So that was the Restart Fund, again, part of the July stimulus package. So that scheme has just gone live as well. So we're administering that, and we expect hundreds of B&Bs to come in for that grant. But funding was provided for coach tour operators as well as part of the July stimulus package, and also we're working on that. And we are continuing to evolve and develop our business supports. So we know businesses face a very different challenge now heading into the winter. And they need to, like we mentioned earlier, some may decide not to close early or may try to stay open. So we're working with businesses on their financials as well, just to try and make sure that they make the right decision for themselves to stay open. And obviously there will also be a number of demand initiatives for the winter. The Stay and Spend scheme is obviously out there as well. But we're also going to be looking at a number of seasonal campaigns as well on the demand side.
And finally, Mary, the growth in the staycation market was the saving grace for many tourism-related businesses this summer. But is Fáilte Ireland predicting that growth in staycations to be sustained over the coming years?
Well, I think, it's interesting when you look at the consumer and what they're looking for. First of all, safety. And they need to know that, where they are is safe. And Ireland has that in abundance because, as I mentioned, businesses have gone that length to implement the safety charter and the reopening guidelines, so they are safe to visit, and that's really, really important. And that's going to be important for a long time for the consumer. And then secondly, we have to give them value for money. That's what they're looking for, and that's what will make it really, really attractive. And, Irish people will step up to the mark, and they have been all summer, and we know that they will, and support, local and Irish businesses. So I guess we just have to make it as attractive. And I do think you'll find, Karl, and we're hearing this an awful lot, people are really rediscovering Ireland and are really, going back to places I've heard many people say they haven't been to since they were on school tours, or, they've never been to in Ireland and didn't know existed. So it's about communicating all that we have on offer as well, and making sure we keep getting that message out here that you can keep rediscovering Ireland.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Mary Stack, the Head of Product Development with Fáilte Ireland, and I would certainly encourage local tourism businesses to apply for grant aid through their Adaptation Fund before the 8th of October deadline. After the break, Nick Ashmore, the CEO of the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, discusses Ireland's largest state-backed business loan guarantee initiative, the COVID-19 Credit Guarantee Scheme. So do stay tuned for that.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast